The doorbell jingled, blending into the lively clamor of Firecrest Grill during peak hours. The thick scent of grilled meat and crispy fries hung in the air, tinged with the faint trace of cleaning agents left over from the morning shift. Eleanor Reed, wearing a white apron stained with a few greasy spots, weaved her way between the tightly packed tables. She balanced a tray full of orders, cheeseburgers, fries, and sodas, forcing a smile despite the aching in her shoulders and the numbness in her feet after 8 straight hours on her feet. At the counter, Isabel twirled a lock of blonde hair around her finger, giggling at Curtis, a tall, playful employee who preferred joking over working. Eleanor glanced over and sighed quietly. A line of customers still waited at the register, but neither of them seemed to care. The glass door swung open. A middle-aged man stepped inside. He wore a light blue shirt, dark slacks, and polished shoes. His demeanor was calm, his gaze sharp yet composed. Eleanor noticed no one else in the diner seemed to acknowledge him. Isabel gave him a quick glance before turning back to laugh at a male customer with a gold watch, and Curtis pretended to be busy wiping the counter. Even Mr. Martin, the shift manager standing near the kitchen, turned away, avoiding the stranger's eyes. The man showed no reaction. He simply stood there, hands in his pockets, calmly surveying the restaurant with an oddly serene expression. Eleanor swallowed hard. The silence around him unsettled her. She understood the unspoken rule well. Customers who looked like they didn't have money were to be ignored. No need to serve them quickly, let alone warmly. But today she was tired of those terrible rules. She set the tray down on the counter, adjusted her apron, and stepped forward. "Hello, sir," she said with a gentle smile. "Welcome to Firecrest Grill. What can I get for you today?" The man turned to her. He looked at her a second longer than usual, as if evaluating something behind his ash-gray eyes. Then he smiled, a rare, deep smile. "It's a relief to finally have someone notice me." Eleanor nodded without asking further. "Double cheeseburger, no onions," he said. "Crispy fries, black coffee, no sugar." "Yes, sir." She entered the order. In less than 3 minutes, she had personally prepared the tray and brought it to his table. "Thank you," he said, lifting the coffee cup and gently turning it in his hands. "You're welcome," she replied. "We always try to be fast and accurate." He gave a slight nod, his voice warm and low. "You have a rare work ethic. Not everyone does the right thing when no one's watching." Eleanor was briefly caught off guard, then smiled faintly. "I believe everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are." He paused, his eyes brightening, and then said, "You deserve more than this. Remember my words." Without waiting for a reply, he picked up a fry and took a bite, as if the conversation had never happened. From the counter, Mr. Martin stood with arms crossed, staring intently at her. His eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a firm line. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the counter, each tap heavy and steady, like a silent warning. Eleanor turned back toward the counter, trying to hide her emotions, but her heart was pounding in her chest. She knew she had just crossed an invisible line, and something was about to change. The next morning, Eleanor walked into Firecrest Grill with a strange feeling in her chest. The diner was still the same. The smell of bacon and brewed coffee filled the air. The sound of sizzling pans and the constant churning of the receipt printer echoed from the kitchen. But something was off. She sensed it the moment she walked in. The way Isabel looked at her was no longer harmless. There was a hint of something else in her gaze. Discomfort, maybe even resentment. Curtis didn't so much as glance at her. At the counter, Martin stood with arms crossed, staring at the morning shift schedule. His face was blank, but the way he avoided her eyes told her everything she needed to know. Carefully, Eleanor tied her apron, preparing for her shift, when a voice rang out. "Eleanor, office." Martin's voice, cold as a cup of coffee left out overnight. She looked up. Isabel pressed her lips together, trying to hide a smile, and Curtis turned away, but not fast enough for her to miss the smirk tugging at his mouth. Eleanor's heart pounded. Martin's office was small and box-like, the air stale with old coffee and damp paper. He sat behind the desk, hands folded as though presiding over a trial, not speaking to an employee who had worked tirelessly for the past 14 months. "Sit," he said, not lifting his eyes from the stack of papers. Eleanor sat, her back stiff as a wire. "We're making staffing adjustments," Martin said, his tone indifferent. "Unfortunately, your shift is no longer a fit." Eleanor froze. "You mean, I'm being fired?" Martin nodded, as if she had spoken the words for him. "There's no valid reason. I've never had a complaint. I'm always on time." "Eleanor," Martin interrupted. "Sometimes it's not about performance. It's about attitude." Eleanor understood immediately. This wasn't about her work. This was the price of being kind to someone deemed undeserving. She clenched her hands beneath the desk, steadying her breath. "Because I served him?" Martin didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly. Silence was the cruelest confirmation of all. Eleanor stood. "All right," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, but it didn't break. As she stepped out of the office, the diner seemed to pause. Isabel watched her from the coffee machine. Curtis peeked out from the kitchen. They all knew. They were waiting to see how she would react. Eleanor said nothing. She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. Then she walked out, not like someone defeated, but like someone who had just severed the final thread tying her to injustice. Outside, the morning breeze brushed her cheek. Across the street, sunlight glinted off the windows of a passing bus, making everything seem just a little brighter. But Eleanor only felt hollow. She pulled out her phone, opened her contacts, and hovered over the name, Felix, little brother. She couldn't tell him she'd just lost her job. Not yet. Instead, she hit call, keeping her voice light. "Hey, I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" Felix laughed on the other end. "I'm good. Just turned in my essay. Pretty sure I nailed it." Eleanor forced a smile. "Good. I'm proud of you." After hanging up, she stared back at Firecrest Grill. Then her phone rang again. An unknown number. "Eleanor Reed?" A deep, calm male voice said. "This is Jonathan Langley. We met yesterday." She froze. "You're? The man you served dinner, yes. I need to speak with you. There's an offer you should hear." Eleanor paused for a few seconds. "Why?" "Because I'm the owner of the Firecrest Grill chain. And I want to know why you were the only person in that entire restaurant who treated me like a human being." The next morning, Eleanor sat in the corner of Stonebrick Cafe, a small, quiet shop tucked between two old bookstores and a flower stall by the street. She had arrived 15 minutes early, clutching a cup of coffee she hadn't taken a sip from. Each time the door opened, her heart gave a little jump. And then, exactly at 9 o'clock as scheduled, he walked in. Jonathan Langley needed no introduction. Though simply dressed, black shirt, charcoal gray coat, no tie, he carried the air of someone used to leading, not following. He spotted her immediately. With a slight nod, he walked over, took the seat across from her, set his phone gently on the wooden table, and folded his hands calmly. "Thank you for coming," he said. Eleanor gave a small nod, still wary. "To be honest, I'm not sure why I'm here." "You should know," Jonathan began. "Firecrest Grill is a chain I built from scratch, and I have a habit of visiting branches undercover, as a regular customer, just to observe. To see how the staff treat ordinary people?" Eleanor guessed. Jonathan smiled. "Exactly. And I was the only one who didn't treat you like you were invisible. Not just that," he leaned in slightly. "You were the only one who wasn't afraid to do the right thing, even when it came at a cost." She tightened her grip around the coffee cup. "And I did pay for it." Jonathan nodded, contemplative. "I know. They fired you for it. But I'm not here to apologize on their behalf." Eleanor looked up, her eyes sharpening. "Then what do you want?" Jonathan pulled out a business card. He placed it in front of her with no wasted motion. "I want you to come back, but not as a server." Eleanor frowned. "You're kidding." "I'm not," he said plainly. "I want you to manage the Firecrest branch you worked at. I need someone to turn that place around. completely, not by enforcing obedience, but by leading with principle and fairness. Eleanor went still. From being fired to being offered the manager's role? I don't have any management experience, she said, voice low. You have something more important. Integrity, Jonathan replied. Experience. I can help you build. She looked down at the business card, his name embossed in crisp, sharp lettering. And the others? She asked. Martin? Isabel? Curtis? They won't accept me. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. They don't have to accept you. They have to do their jobs. And if they can't, they don't need to stay. Eleanor bit her lip, her thoughts a storm. Fear, doubt, but also something warm beginning to burn inside her. The desire to set things right. Jonathan stood, as if sensing the shift within her. Think about it. I don't need an answer today. But if you're ready to stop taking orders and start making change, call me. He turned and walked out of the cafe, like a gust of cold, decisive wind. Eleanor sat in silence. In her hand, a business card and an opportunity. Not for revenge, but for redemption. To prove that kindness is not weakness. Outside, the midday sun began to filter through the leaves. And inside her, for the first time in days, something stirred. Something called hope. 2 days later, Eleanor stood in front of Firecrest Grill. The glass reflected her image in the new manager's uniform, navy blue shirt, slacks, and a name tag pinned neatly to her chest that read, Eleanor Reed, manager. Her heart pounded. Her palms were damp with sweat. But she didn't step back. She pushed the door open and walked in. The familiar scent of frying oil, grilled meat, and brewed coffee rushed to meet her. Everything looked exactly the same, yet the atmosphere was different, like someone had just dropped a glass and everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the sound of it shattering. Isabel was the first to see her. Her hand froze mid-wipe across the counter. Curtis looked up from the soda machine, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. Eleanor gave a small nod, said nothing, and walked toward what had once been Martin's office, unlocking the door with the new key she'd been given. As the door shut behind her, the shock still lingered in the air outside. The office hadn't changed, still smelled faintly of old cigarettes, and the shift schedule was still a mess on the desk. Eleanor sat down in the chair Martin used to occupy and took a deep breath. She had no leadership experience, no management degree, but she had something the others didn't, a view from below, from the margins. She knew the frustration of being overlooked, the humiliation of bowing your head because you needed the job, and she knew exactly what needed to change. 30 minutes later, she stepped back out. Can I have everyone's attention, please? Her voice was clear, not loud, but steady. The staff paused. Some stood straighter, waiting. Curtis crossed his arms. Isabel smirked but stayed silent. Eleanor looked at each of them. I won't take long. As of today, I'm the new manager of this Firecrest Grill branch. And I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to fix what's been broken. She paused. No more favoritism with shifts. No more treating customers differently because of a gold watch. And no one gets ignored just because they don't look worth serving. If you do your job right, I'll have your back. If you push against that, I'll replace you. No one spoke. But in the eyes of those who had long endured in silence, she saw something: surprise and maybe hope. Isabel broke the silence first, voice dripping with disdain. Not even an hour into the job and you're already giving a speech. Eleanor met her gaze calm, not angry. I don't give speeches. I work. Curtis let out a half laugh but stayed quiet. Eleanor gave a short nod. All right, let's get back to work. Like usual, but the right way. All morning, Eleanor didn't return to the office. She ran orders, trained the new hires, wiped down counters when needed, and corrected anyone who missed a step firmly but fairly. No one could say she was giving orders she didn't know how to follow herself. By 2 p.m., the slowest hour of the day, she returned to the office and opened her notebook. At the top of the page, a list had already taken shape. Review shift schedules. Establish fair reward system. Meet privately with overlooked staff. She didn't have all the answers. But each step, each action, each decision would lay the foundation. She hadn't come back just to fill a role. She'd come back to rebuild a broken system from the inside out. The door to Firecrest closed behind her. But this time, Eleanor wasn't being pushed out. This time, she held the key. Friday afternoon, Firecrest Grill began sliding into peak hours. Customers streamed in steadily, filling every table while the kitchen printer spat out tickets without pause. Eleanor stood behind the counter, reviewing receipts, eyes flicking quickly across each section of the restaurant. She knew that weekend evenings were the most chaotic and the perfect moment for anyone who wanted to sabotage. Isabel was stationed at the register, but her pace was suspiciously slow. She lingered too long with customers, repeating orders as if deliberately stalling. Curtis manned the drinks station, but his hands moved lazily and his eyes kept flicking toward Eleanor. Then the first complaint came in. A man held up his tray. "I ordered crispy fries. These are soggy." Eleanor apologized and replaced the order immediately. But it wasn't long before an elderly woman spoke up. "I specifically asked for a burger without cheese. This has cheese all over it." Eleanor froze. She knew who was on the grill today: Curtis, who rarely made such careless mistakes. If it wasn't accidental, it was intentional. She stepped into the kitchen. "Curtis." Her voice was calm but firm. "Did you prepare order 48? Curtis shrugged. "Maybe." "Why?" The customer requested no cheese. "Oh," Curtis feigned surprise. "Guess I misread. Maybe the new guy entered it wrong?" Eleanor looked him straight in the eyes. "We both know that's not true." Curtis smirked. "Are you accusing me?" "No," Eleanor said evenly. "I'm stating a fact." He was silent for a second, then turned away. "Guess I'll just get back to work then, manager." Eleanor didn't respond. Not yet. By the end of the shift, Firecrest was more chaotic than usual. Eleanor stayed late, reviewing the camera footage and order logs. She knew she needed evidence, not for revenge, but for accountability. Any system that's meant to stand needs a spine. Around 11 p.m. she found what she was looking for: multiple instances of Curtis manually altering toppings in the system intentionally. The next morning, Eleanor arrived early. As Curtis walked through the door, she called out to him. "We need to talk." He frowned but followed her into the office. She laid a printout of the order logs and a series of stills from the security footage in front of him. "You deliberately messed up orders." Curtis leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So what? You gonna fire me? You really think you can change this place just because the owner likes you?" Eleanor didn't argue. She looked him in the eye, voice steady. "I'm not liked. I was chosen because I'm not afraid of people like you." "People like me?" Curtis raised an eyebrow. "People who think power comes from defiance, not responsibility." He gave a dry laugh. "Good luck, Eleanor." She tilted her head. "I don't need luck. I need a real team." Curtis stood up. "I'm quitting. Better than working for someone who doesn't know their place." "All right," Eleanor said, not stopping him. "But before you leave, you'll complete this week's incident report. I want your actions and your reasons on record." "Honestly." Curtis paused. For the first time, his eyes flickered with uncertainty. Eleanor held his gaze. "Not because I want revenge, but because I won't let misconduct pass without leaving a trace." Curtis stayed silent for a moment, then picked up the pen. When he finally walked out, Eleanor filed the documents away. She knew this was just the beginning. There would be more resistance. But now everyone knew she hadn't taken the manager's chair just to fill it. She took it to rebuild the values that had been broken. 1 week after Curtis's departure, Firecrest Grill began to run more smoothly. Eleanor had revised the shift schedule, reinstated internal evaluations, and organized regular staff meetings. Not everyone agreed with her changes, but for the first time in months, no one felt invisible. It was a quiet Monday morning. Eleanor was showing a new employee how to log stock inventory when the bell above the door rang, not rushed, not hesitant, but rhythmically. She looked up. Jonathan Langley stepped inside, walking with the same easy gait as the first time she met him. But this time, there was no casual shirt. He wore a dark suit, crisp white shirt, no tie, yet carried himself with unsettling precision. His gaze swept over the restaurant like an inspector hiding a scorecard. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and approached. "Mr. Langley," she greeted him. "I didn't expect to see you again this soon." Jonathan nodded. "I always return after 3 weeks." She frowned slightly. "It's only been 2. He smiled. "Correct. But this time I didn't come just to check in." They sat at the quiet corner table. Eleanor tried to read his expression, but he remained unreadable. "The changes you've made here," he said after a sip of coffee, "have been reported to headquarters. Fast, decisive, and noticeable." "Noticeable in a good way?" Eleanor asked. "Good and attention-grabbing." She stayed quiet. He continued. "Eleanor, I oversee 27 branches. At least 10 are in the same condition this one used to be. I want you to help me transform not just one location, but the entire region." Eleanor looked up, heart racing. "You mean regional operations?" Jonathan nodded. "Not immediately. But I want to start a trial. You'll take charge of another branch, bigger, busier, and with deeper problems. She said nothing. You don't have to give up this location, he added. But you'll need to divide your time. Lead from afar. Build teams. Not just fix issues, create a system that doesn't break. Eleanor took a deep breath. And if I fail? Jonathan looked her straight in the eye. Then I'll know you need more training. But I'm not betting on failure. She thought back to the early days carrying food trays, swallowing insults, being fired for doing the right thing. And now here she was, being asked to rebuild a whole system. Give me 24 hours, she said. Jonathan stood. Of course. But remember, Eleanor, having an opportunity is one thing. Knowing when to take it is what makes a leader. He left, leaving Eleanor alone in a dining room slowly filling with customers. She sat there, heart unsteady, but deep within, something else was rising. Not fear, but ambition. If she had ever believed she was just a voiceless server. That belief ended today. A week after Curtis's departure, Firecrest Grill was running more smoothly. Eleanor had revised the shift system, reinstated internal performance evaluations, and set up regular staff meetings. Not everyone agreed with her changes, but for the first time in months, no one felt invisible. It was a calm Monday morning with few customers. Eleanor was showing a new employee how to process inventory when the bell above the door chimed. Not hastily, not sharply, but with a steady rhythm. She looked up. Jonathan Langley walked in, the same composed stride as the day they first met. But this time there was no casual shirt. He wore a dark suit, white dress shirt, no tie, and looked impeccably sharp. His eyes swept across the diner like a silent inspector, masking any trace of judgment. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. Mr. Langley, she said, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Jonathan nodded. I always return after 3 weeks. She frowned. It's only been 2. He smiled. Correct. But this time, I'm not here just to check in. They sat at the quietest table in the corner. Eleanor tried to read his face, but his expression gave nothing away. The changes you've made here, he said after a sip of coffee, have been reported to headquarters. Fast, decisive, impactful. Positive impact? Eleanor asked. Positive and attention-grabbing. She stayed silent. He continued, Eleanor, I oversee 27 branches. At least 10 of them are declining like this one used to be. I want your help. Not just to change one restaurant, but an entire region. Eleanor looked up, heart pounding. You mean regional operations? Jonathan nodded. Not immediately, but I want to start a trial. You'll take on another branch, bigger, busier, and with even deeper issues. She said nothing. You don't have to give up this one, he added. But you'll need to split your time. Lead remotely. Build teams. You'll no longer just fix problems. You'll build a system that prevents them. Eleanor drew in a deep breath. And if I fail? Jonathan met her eyes. Then I'll know you need more training. But I'm not betting on failure. She thought of her early days, carrying food trays, enduring condescension, getting fired for doing the right thing. And now she was being asked to redesign an entire system. Give me 24 hours to think, she said. Jonathan stood. Of course. But remember, Eleanor, opportunity is one thing. Recognizing when to take it. That's what makes a leader. He walked out, leaving Eleanor alone in a restaurant that was slowly filling up again. She sat there, mind reeling, but deep down, something stirred. Not fear, but ambition. If she had ever believed she was just a voiceless server, that moment was over. 3 days later, Eleanor stepped into the Firecrest branch on Ashwell Street, one of the largest in the Central District. Unlike her previous location, this one had a wide storefront, dual registers, and nearly double the seating capacity. But the first thing she noticed wasn't the scale. It was the atmosphere. Heavy, dim. No one smiled. The staff moved like shadows, their eyes tired, their gestures cold. A broad-shouldered man stood by the kitchen door, arms crossed. His face stern, eyes sharp with control. Eleanor recognized him from the reports. Daniel Koch, the current manager. The man she had been assigned to replace. Who are you? A voice called from behind the counter. A young woman with dyed red hair and heavy makeup, early 20s, maybe. Eleanor stepped forward. I'm Eleanor Reed. I'll be co-managing this location with Mr. Koch. Daniel stepped out of the kitchen, his face unreadable. Co-managing? He repeated, as if tasting something bitter. Mr. Langley informed you, didn't he? Eleanor asked, keeping her tone neutral. He did, but I don't recall asking for a helper. His voice was dry like rusted steel. You didn't, but the system did. Daniel narrowed his eyes but said nothing. Eleanor knew the type, the ones who didn't strike first but waited for you to stumble. She spent the entire morning observing. No commands, no corrections, just notes. Delayed orders, complaints, staff who worked side by side without saying a word. In 2 hours, there were 4 incorrect orders, 2 walkouts due to wait times, and not a single employee apologized. Everything passed as normal. When the lunch rush ended, Eleanor walked into the manager's office. Daniel was already there, leaning on his hand, as if waiting to see what she'd say. This team isn't operating, Eleanor said plainly. They're surviving. Daniel smirked. This isn't that tiny branch you fixed. This is the central hub. Over 800 tickets a day. The bigger the hub, the more it needs to function properly, Eleanor replied. Sounds nice on paper, Daniel said dryly. But this is real life. They work for paychecks, not for a mission. Then maybe they need to see a leader who has a mission. Daniel crossed his arms. Try it. But I won't be cleaning up when you crash. Eleanor stood. I'm not asking you to clean up. I'm here to rebuild. That evening, Eleanor returned to her old branch, now mostly under the supervision of her assistant manager. As she walked in, she was greeted with a wave, a nod, a smile. All the things missing at Ashwell. She sat in the office corner, opened her laptop, and began drafting a new operations plan for Ashwell. She knew what was coming wouldn't be easy. Daniel would resist. The staff would push back. They didn't want change, especially not led by an outsider. But Eleanor didn't need their approval on day one. She needed results. And eventually they'd have to make a choice. Keep up or be left behind. Thursday. 1 week since Eleanor began her role at the Ashwell branch. On the surface, everything seemed normal, orders were going out steadily, staff remained polite, and Daniel hadn't caused any confrontations. But it was exactly this excess of normalcy that made Eleanor uneasy. And then came the first complaint. An elderly customer called the support hotline, claiming a young female staff member mocked her when she asked to change an item due to an allergy. Eleanor checked the security footage and saw the opposite. The customer was the one who became agitated, while the staff member calmly explained store policy. 3 days later, an online order was canceled due to double delivery fees. But the system recorded no such error from the restaurant side. Eleanor reviewed the transaction ID and noticed the price had been manually adjusted after the order was processed. A pattern was emerging. Every small mistake, order errors, customer complaints, service delays happened only when she wasn't physically present at Ashwell. That evening, she requested backdoor access to the internal system logs. She knew she was treading into sensitive territory, but she also knew she couldn't lead from the shadows. She combed through every order modification made over the past week. One username kept appearing. Coke_D at firecrest.co. Daniel. Her finger stopped on the transaction chain. Every issue had been manually altered by the former manager's account. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her head spinning. This was no longer passive resistance. It was deliberate, calculated sabotage. The next morning, she called Daniel into the office. No pretense. She simply placed the printed system logs on the desk. What are you doing, Daniel? He looked at the pages, then back up at her without a hint of embarrassment. You think I'm sabotaging the store? You know I don't think. I know. Daniel smiled, calm, disturbingly composed. You have your proof. So what now? Report me to Jonathan? No, Eleanor said. I'm giving you a chance. A chance? His voice laced with sarcasm. To stop. And if you don't, I won't need to report anything. The staff will see. The system will record. And you'll lose the only thing you've clung to all these years, your credibility. Daniel gave a soft laugh. You really believe you can bring me down when I've been part of this place for over a decade? Eleanor didn't blink. I didn't come to bring anyone down. I came to drag what's rotten into the light. And whoever can't stand that light will step back into the dark. Daniel walked out without a word. But Eleanor knew this was only round one. The Ashwell branch wasn't just a large store. It was a fortress, one where bad habits had rooted deep. And Daniel wasn't just a stubborn manager. He was a living emblem of resistance to change. But Eleanor hadn't come this far to stop at symbols. She had once been fired for doing the right thing. She had once watched people like Daniel manipulate everything from behind closed doors. Not this time. This time she wouldn't stay silent. Monday morning began like any other, but Eleanor knew today wouldn't be like the rest. Because last night, she had received an email from Jonathan Langley. Subject: Ashwell Branch Internal Review. Body: I'll be visiting at the end of the week. Make sure all reports, data, and the truth are ready. No fluff, no good luck. But Eleanor understood. This was the final reminder. Either this system gets saved or it gets replaced. Throughout the week, Eleanor quietly prepared. She didn't just compile operational reports. She also spoke privately with every team member, one at a time. No judgment, just listening. A young chef named Malin, who had barely spoken since she arrived, finally murmured, "You're not like the others. They gave orders. You ask questions." A waitress named Freya sighed. "Daniel told us not to trust you, but you didn't force us to trust. You showed us why we could." Eleanor knew. When staff start calling you "you" instead of the manager, that's when trust begins. Friday morning, Daniel made his move. He sent an email CCing the entire upper management team, including Jonathan. "I would like to report instability in the current leadership at Ashwell. Many decisions are being made without practicality, causing disruption among staff. I recommend temporarily suspending Eleanor Reed's involvement." Not a word about his own actions. Only blame. Eleanor read the email. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. She didn't reply. She printed it and brought it to the all-staff meeting that afternoon. The break room was packed. Daniel was there, too. Sitting in the back row, arms crossed, eyes cold, like he was watching an amateur stumble through a performance. Eleanor stepped forward, holding the printed email. "Someone has claimed the changes here are causing instability." A wave of whispers rippled across the room. She gently placed the paper on the table. "So I ask you, is instability when customers start coming back? When shifts begin on time? When no one has to apologize for mistakes they didn't make?" No one answered, but their eyes said enough. "We could go back," she continued, "to a place where mistakes were ignored, where the loudest voices got away with anything, where the quiet workers were forgotten. But I don't think we want to go back there anymore." For the first time, someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room. Daniel stood. "Very impressive," he said flatly. "But TED Talks don't run restaurants." Eleanor met his gaze. "I don't need speeches, Daniel. I have data." She turned on the screen. A summary table appeared. Order fulfillment efficiency, up 27% in 2 weeks. Positive customer feedback, doubled. Sudden staff absences, dropped to 0. There was no countering numbers like that. Daniel clenched his jaw. No sarcasm, no denial. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out the office keys, and set them on the table. "You win," he said, eyes averted, then turned and walked out. No one saw him off. That evening, Eleanor stayed late. She looked around the space. Once chaotic, now calm. The yellow glow from the overhead lights reflected off the clean floor, like the quiet after a battle. She opened the office drawer. Inside, one item remained. An old key, its metal tag rusted, engraved with the name Daniel K. Eleanor didn't throw it away. She kept it. As a reminder, the old system always leaves traces. But the choice to preserve it or change it doesn't belong to the past. It belongs to her. Saturday afternoon, Eleanor received a message with only 5 words. "Whitmore Cafe. For PM. JL." No greeting. No explanation. But she knew exactly who sent it and that this wasn't just a casual coffee meeting. Whitmore Cafe was just as she remembered it, quiet, warm, with soft jazz trickling through the air like a current beneath the surface. Jonathan Langley was already seated at the corner table, a cup of strong black espresso before him and an old leather notebook open in front of him. Eleanor walked in, straightened her shirt, and approached, not too fast, not too slow. Jonathan looked up as she neared. He smiled, not politely, but like someone affirming something they'd already decided. "A familiar seat for someone who no longer is," he said, motioning for her to sit. Eleanor took the seat. "I take it this isn't just about coffee?" Jonathan nodded. "You guessed right." He opened his notebook, flipped through a few pages, then stopped. His voice was low, measured, but carried weight. "Eleanor, I started Firecrest with a single diner. Not because I was passionate about food, but because I wanted to build a system where hard work wasn't punished. Where customers weren't judged by how they looked. And somewhere along the way, I failed to hold on to that." He looked at her. "Until you came along." Eleanor said nothing. Her breath slowed. "I tested you with a broken branch. You restored it. I gave you one in chaos and you brought it back to order through principle, not authority." He slid the notebook across the table toward her. Inside, a map of Firecrest's regional structure, the names of current area managers, and a blank space. At the center of that blank space, handwritten in blue ink, "Candidate, Eleanor Reed." Eleanor looked up. "You want me to run the whole region?" Jonathan nodded. 8 branches. 1 district. Nearly 300 employees. You don't have to manage every person, you'll be creating the culture that teaches them to manage themselves. Eleanor sat still. Her heart pounded, not from ambition, but from the weight of responsibility. She remembered the early days, being overlooked, underestimated, alone. And now the man who'd once held every seat of power in the system was offering her a chair that had no name. "Why me?" she asked. "You have dozens of senior managers." Jonathan smiled softly. "They're good at managing spreadsheets. You manage trust." He leaned back. "I won't pressure you. You can decline. Stay at Ashwell. Or walk a different path. But if you accept, you'll be the first woman in our system to hold this role. And you'll have full authority to build your own team." Eleanor looked down at the notebook, then out the window. People bustled by outside, all in a hurry. But inside her, time slowed. No one ever expected a waitress fired for doing the right thing to become the one shaping an entire region. And because no one expected it, she knew she was exactly the right person to do it. Eleanor looked up. Her voice was steady. "I accept." Jonathan didn't look surprised, but this time his smile was lighter, almost relieved. "Then," he said, rising from his seat, "let's rewrite how a restaurant chain is run." That night, Eleanor stayed late. She sat alone in the office at Ashwell, looking at the shift schedule, once the branch's biggest weak spot, now a shared space where staff signed up proactively and supported one another. She took it down. Tomorrow, a new board would go up. But this time, it wasn't just for one restaurant. It was for an entire region. Monday, 7:15 a.m. The Southeast Regional headquarters of Firecrest was located on the 3rd floor of an old shopping center. No flashy signs, no receptionists in suits. Just a frosted glass door with a small label taped on the inside. Regional Coordination Department, internal use only. Eleanor stepped in, no longer wearing an apron nor the standard manager's shirt. Today, she wore a charcoal gray blazer, her hair neatly tied back, and carried a laptop instead of a notepad. But the most noticeable change was in her eyes, steady, unwavering, certain. She passed unfamiliar faces, people who had once worked under the former managers. Some glanced at her, then looked back at their screens. Others whispered quietly. They knew she was the new one. They didn't yet know she was the reason Daniel Koch had left the system without a goodbye. But they would soon enough. 9 a.m. main conference room. The 8 branch managers of the region were present, each representing a district serving more than 500,000 people. Some offered polite greetings. Others made no effort to hide their reservations. Eleanor entered without waiting for anyone to speak first. She opened her laptop, connected to the projector, and displayed the first slide. No pictures, no charts, just a single sentence. Systems don't collapse because of mistakes. They collapse because of the habit of ignoring them. Silence filled the room. She began. "This week, I'll be visiting each branch, not to inspect, but to listen. I'm not here to impose Ashwell's system. I'm here to understand why it failed and how it changed." An older man with graying hair, Gerald, the longest-serving branch manager, spoke up. "And what if my branch doesn't have any problems?" Eleanor replied. "Good. But we're not measuring by what went wrong. We're measuring by how right it has become." Gerald nodded slowly. A few others began taking notes. She continued. Starting next month, we'll implement anonymous employee feedback at every branch. Each quarter, reviews will be organized by team members themselves. Fairness doesn't come from command, it comes from transparency. Another hand went up. Grace, the sharp-eyed manager from Hillsworth. You once said fairness starts with leadership. So with your new authority, who evaluates you? Eleanor smiled. You do. The room went silent. For the first time, they realized she hadn't come to lead from above. She'd come to lead by example. 11:45 a.m. Eleanor stepped out onto the office balcony looking out over the midday city. The breeze was cool but not comforting. It carried the scent of traffic, concrete, and the invisible weight of expectation. She knew she was entering a different game now. No more direct superiors. No single branch where she could fix issues one by one. Now she was leading a system of leaders. And the hardest part wasn't giving orders. It was making others want to do the right thing when no one was watching. Her phone buzzed. A message from Freya, the young server from Ashwell. Since you left, the new people say she just got lucky. But I know better. You made this place yours, not through luck. I'm applying to be a shift lead. You once believed in me. Now I'll prove you were right. Eleanor looked at the message, warmth rising in her chest. She didn't need to respond. She didn't need to carry everything alone anymore. Now she was leading. But what made her different was that she was bringing others along with her. And this journey was only just beginning. 1 week after the first regional meeting, Eleanor sensed something was beginning to crack. Not in the form of obvious mistakes. No hostile emails like Daniel's. No resignation letters, no complaints. Everything was flowing too smoothly. Suspiciously so. She began receiving weekly reports from each branch, clean, flawless, without a single error. Charts were stable. Customer satisfaction ratings, 4.5 and above. Not a single employee marked dissatisfied on the first round of internal feedback. Too perfect. Too unreal. Eleanor knew one thing for sure, no system goes from chaos to perfection in just 10 days. The problem wasn't in the data. It was in the collective silence. She started with the Mill River branch, a mid-sized store that used to have the highest shift cancellation rate in the region. But this week, no one called in sick. No one arrived late. Staff smiled. Service followed protocol. Yet when she stepped behind the counter, a young employee named Gavin was trembling slightly as he wiped glasses. He avoided her gaze. In the break room, conversation stopped when she entered. She sat down, tried to ease into conversation. No one opened up. That night, she messaged Gavin privately. Just one question. Is everything really okay? He didn't reply immediately. Close to midnight, a message finally appeared. We were told that if we say anything negative, others will suffer. No one speaks honestly. If a new person tries, there won't be a second time. The next morning, Eleanor called a private meeting with the Mill River branch manager, a woman named Agnes. Your weekly report looks excellent, Eleanor began. I just have one question, not a single negative comment? Agnes gave a dry smile. We've learned from the mistakes of other branches. Not every reaction needs to be negative. But what if the feedback is true? Then it needs to be reframed before it damages team morale. Eleanor looked directly at her. You're censoring internal feedback? Agnes didn't deny it. She simply replied, voice even. I'm maintaining operational rhythm. You said we need stability. I'm keeping it stable. No, Eleanor said. I said we need truth. Agnes stood, her tone sharper now. If you want every branch to start tearing itself apart, you'll have a very unstable region. Eleanor stood too. If I have to choose between a region that runs smoothly by silencing people and one that's noisy but honest, I'll choose the second. Every time. Eleanor left Mill River with a clear feeling. No one was sabotaging her. But no one trusted her the same way anymore. They weren't fighting back like Daniel did. They were pretending to comply while quietly dismantling everything she was trying to build. And the most dangerous part? The old system had learned from Daniel's failure. Now it didn't resist openly. It rephrased her words in ways that made truth feel harmless. That night, Eleanor sat before the regional branch map. She marked 3 branches showing signs of being too quiet with red ink. Outside, a light rain fell against the window. She wasn't afraid of facing opposition again. But this time, the enemy wasn't a person. Not a personality. It was a culture of nods without belief. She didn't need their affection. She needed to wake them from passive acceptance. Because if she didn't, she wasn't changing the system. She was just putting lipstick on it. Before it cracked one last time. Eleanor knew she couldn't overturn a silence maintained by fear and manipulation. If she confronted people individually, they would retreat. If she threatened them, they would comply and lie better. She needed a different way. A mirror. One that would let the system see itself. On Wednesday, Eleanor sent an email to all 8 branches. This week, I will not evaluate any performance reports. Instead, I ask each branch to select one non-management employee to write an honest account of a workday. No names. No templates. Just truth. All accounts will be shared publicly across the region. Randomly selected. Unedited. I am not looking for violations. I am looking for people. A quiet ripple of unrest spread. In the office, Eleanor's assistant, Jonah, young and once part of a lower-tier branch, asked softly, "Do you think anyone will actually write the truth?" Eleanor looked at him. "Not everyone. But a few is enough. And if no one dares? Then at least the entire system will know they're afraid of honesty itself." 2 days later, the first accounts began to come in. Some were short, rigid. Shift started at 8 a.m. Nothing special. I followed protocol. But some were long. Raw. Real. A customer yelled at me for a wrong item when the head chef told me to just say we were out of ingredients. I stayed quiet, because I needed the next shift. But I couldn't sleep that night. I don't know why we're pretending everything's fine. But I do know that if someone speaks up, someone else gets cut first. So we stay silent to survive. Eleanor printed each one. No edits. She created a new internal bulletin and titled it, "A Real Day at Firecrest." She sent all the stories back out to every branch. No commentary. No framing. No conclusions. Just the truth, raw and unvarnished. 3 days later, Jonah walked into her office, eyes bright. "You need to see this." He showed her a feedback sheet from the Brayford branch, once considered flawless. On it was an anonymous message. "I'm not afraid anymore. If others dare to speak, so will I. We shouldn't keep silent just to make someone else's boss feel things are under control." And that wasn't all. A soft-spoken branch manager, Thomas, known for saying little, sent Eleanor a direct message. "I used to think you were a threat to the system. Now I think you're saving it from the kind of fake professionalism we got used to. I want to start over the right way. If there's still a place for someone like me." Eleanor closed her laptop, saying nothing. She knew the first crack in the mask of pretense had formed. Not because of an accusation, but because of a truthful story. That night, she stepped onto the office balcony and looked out at the city glowing under evening lights. Quietly, she exhaled. A revolution doesn't need slogans. It just needs a mirror big enough that everyone has to look and ask themselves, "Have I really been honest?" She didn't shatter the system. She made it tremble with truth. And from that moment, Eleanor understood. Every lasting change must begin from within. 1 week after Eleanor released the series of honest accounts, the Firecrest system in the Southeast region was no longer the same. Not because everything was fixed, but because people had begun to see what wasn't and dared to admit it. As always, change didn't start from the top. It came from the middle, from those stuck between upper commands and frontline fatigue. The first person to call Eleanor was Thomas Wilkes, manager of the Sandleton branch. Thomas had long been known as the brick wall, no reaction, no resistance, no rebuttal. The kind of person who just said okay and did the bare minimum to keep the system calm. This time, his voice on the phone wasn't flat as usual. "Eleanor, I read all the accounts. One of my former staff, Lily, wrote one of them. I used to think she was naive. Now, I think I'm the one who stayed silent for too long." Eleanor didn't interrupt. She just listened. "I want to change how I manage. Not to protect my position anymore, but to do things right. I just don't know where to start." Eleanor answered without hesitation. "You just did. And you won't be doing it alone." The second person to step forward was Grace Larkin, the sharp-tongued manager of Hillsworth, the same one who challenged Eleanor during the first regional meeting. Grace didn't call. She showed up at Eleanor's office. No knock. "Reed," she said bluntly, "I don't like being pushed to become a better person. But I can't deny it, my team's changing. They're starting to ask each other for input. They're not hiding mistakes. One of them even suggested we get rid of the Employee of the Week board and replace it with a Fix-It-Together board." Eleanor smiled. "And you agreed?" Grace folded her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "At first, no. But then I stood behind the wall and listened to them talk about how to reduce customer wait times. No blaming. No mocking. Just figuring things out." I choked up. Eleanor nodded. "Would you like to join the pilot group for culture shift leadership?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a mouthful. But good idea. Count me in." The next day, Eleanor organized a quiet meeting, off the record, no agenda, inviting only 3 managers, Thomas, Grace, and another, Elio, who had recently stepped down from his position after exposing his former regional director for report tampering. They met in a small cafe. No talk of orders. No mention of KPIs. Just one question. If we were to rebuild leadership from the ground up, where would we begin? Thomas said. Not with goals. Start with what we can no longer ignore. Grace said. End the fear of asking. I don't know needs to be an acceptable answer in team meetings. Elio said. I used to think management meant control. Now I think it's turning fear into meaningful action. Eleanor didn't lead. She just listened, took notes, and smiled. The meeting ended with no official decisions. Just a shared commitment. They weren't going back to the old ways. That evening, Eleanor received a message from Freya, the young waitress once at Ashwell, now in training to be a shift supervisor. A new girl got yelled at by a customer today. I apologized to the guest, but then I went back and asked her if she was okay. She said no one's ever asked her that before. I think. I'm starting to understand why you never led with a handbook. You led with trust. Eleanor set her phone down and poured herself a cup of tea, not coffee, not adrenaline. It wasn't a victory. Just a first day in a long journey. But this time she wasn't walking it alone. Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor received a meeting invite, not through a regular email, but directly from the internal executive scheduling system. Subject: Restructuring of Reporting Procedures and Regional Coordination Authority, Internal Discussion. Organizer: David Corrigan, National CEO of Firecrest. Eleanor paused for a moment when she saw the name. David Corrigan, not only Jonathan Langley's superior, but a man known for his management philosophy. Everything should be clear, but never too real. The meeting was held via video call. The central conference room was starkly lit, sterile. 3 people were present. David Corrigan, calm demeanor, eyes cold as ice. Sylvia Hart, head of internal legal affairs. A senior operations consultant, name not introduced. Eleanor sat upright. Neither defensive nor defiant. Just steady. David opened the meeting, voice even. Ms. Reed, we've been observing the initiatives you've launched in the Southeast region. Transparency, open feedback, dismantling of old hierarchies, yes, all very novel. He paused, then offered a frosty smile. But not everything novel is appropriate. Eleanor said nothing. She waited. We've received reports indicating a decline in staff morale, not due to oppression but to a lack of boundaries. Regional leadership like yours introduces too many behavioral variables, difficult to monitor from headquarters. Sylvia interjected. Legally speaking, non-anonymous feedback being shared publicly can be seen as creating a pressurized environment. We need to re-establish guardrails around the programs you've been implementing. Eleanor responded, voice steady. No feedback was coerced. And I didn't share names. I shared the truth, the same truth this system chose to ignore for years. David shook his head slightly. Truth is sometimes a luxury in a franchise chain. Customers don't need to know the staff is tired. Investors don't care that the system is healing. They need stable numbers. Eleanor looked directly at the screen. What once made Firecrest grow wasn't stable numbers. It was the belief from behind the counter that people were respected. I'm not dismantling anything. I'm trying to bring that belief back. 5 seconds of silence. Eleanor knew it wasn't failure that made them uncomfortable. It was candor. Finally, David concluded. You have 2 choices. 1. Continue your improvements within the framework we set. 2. Step down from your regional post and return to branch-level management, where you once excelled. It wasn't an insult. It was a diplomatic trap. After the meeting, Eleanor sat alone, reading the system note. Access to regional reports. Under review. She knew, if she gave in, everything would return to the old way. If she fought, they might push her out, as they had done to others who dared speak the truth. But this time, she wasn't alone. That evening, as she reviewed documents, an email arrived from Grace Larkin. Subject: I know they want you to back down. Eleanor, if they pressure you to resign, I and at least 4 others will leave the system alongside you. Not because of you, but because we refuse to keep working in a system that punishes what's right. We used to be afraid. Not anymore. Another line followed. We choose the light, even when it burns. Eleanor sat quietly. She knew. The battle had shifted to a higher tier. No longer people against her, but a hierarchy defending itself from real change. And this time Eleanor didn't bow. She began drafting a response to David Corrigan. Not to ask permission, but to confirm. She wasn't going back into the dark. And she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Friday, 8 a.m. The inboxes of all Firecrest Southeast employees received an email with a short subject line. On honesty and our right to choose. From Eleanor Reed, Regional Director. No caps lock. No banners. No bold formatting. Yet within 10 minutes, the entire system was buzzing. The email opened with a plain statement. Over the past few weeks, I've been reminded that honesty is often inconvenient, and that not everyone wants to see a mirror reflecting what isn't working. But I didn't choose honesty because it's pleasant. I chose it because I was once the staff member behind the counter, wishing someone would speak up. Then she got to the point. I've been asked to limit the scope of my efforts, advised to return to the framework, or step down. I'm choosing a third option. No retreat. No silence. No halfway leadership. She attached a 4-page PDF titled, The Firecrest Personnel Declaration, Honest Draft Number 1. Its contents weren't lofty ideals. They were specific, actionable commitments. All internal feedback will be recorded as is, without word edits. No employee will be penalized for speaking the truth. Every branch may nominate 2 staff representatives to join quarterly leadership feedback sessions. No leader shall remain anonymously powerful. All policies must trace back to a named source. At the end, Eleanor wrote, I don't need upper management's approval for basic ethics. What I need is teammates, that's you. If you believe Firecrest deserves to be a place worth working in, not just a place to earn a paycheck, stand up, not with a shout, just with the truth. And don't bow your head. Within 2 hours, more than 120 employees from various branches began forwarding the email through the internal system. Some added lines like, I choose the truth. This is the first time I've seen someone dare say this. Not sure how HQ will react, but I'm done being silent. By noon, 5 branch managers had signed a support pledge for the declaration voluntarily without coercion. Among them, Thomas Wilkes, Grace Larkin, Elio, and, most surprisingly, Agnes, once confronted by Eleanor for censoring feedback at Mill River. She wrote to Eleanor privately, I was wrong, but the truth you brought didn't cast me out, pulled me in. I won't stay on the sidelines again. That same day, HQ responded. An internal email from David Corrigan, initially sent only to executive staff, quickly made the rounds. Regional Director Eleanor Reed has acted beyond her authority. We will be reviewing current power structures and enforcing administrative limits to preserve system consistency. Short, cold, threatening, but unlike every time before, the system didn't go silent. That afternoon, Jonah, Eleanor's assistant, entered her office and placed a printed list on her desk. Nearly 400 people have signed the pledge in support of you, he said. Voluntarily. Eleanor looked up. Her gaze wasn't steely like usual. Today it was softer, like the rain had passed, and the trees had begun to breathe. Then, she said, whatever they do next, we're no longer alone. That night, Eleanor stayed in the office. She looked out at the city, the lights below still shining. But inside her, it wasn't the glow of victory she felt. It was something deeper, belief, that even in a system that seemed unchangeable, if one person dares not to retreat, others will follow. Monday afternoon, Eleanor's phone buzzed. No unknown number, no message thread, just a short, familiar line. Rooftop, 9th floor, 5 p.m. JL. No guessing needed. No room to decline. The 9th floor of Firecrest's regional headquarters was a place no one visited. A raw terrace, no benches, no proper railing, no decor. Just sunlight, wind, and an unfiltered view of the neighborhood, where Eleanor's branches still ran, hour by hour. Jonathan Langley was already there. Same old coat, hands in pockets, eyes scanning below like he could feel each footstep down there. Eleanor stepped forward, stood beside him. No words, not at first. Finally, Jonathan spoke, still facing the city. They called me from headquarters. Told me to rein you in. Eleanor didn't reply. She waited for what mattered more. Jonathan turned to her. For the first time since handing her the southeast region, his eyes held hesitation. I once said you were the first person in 10 years who made me believe this system might still be worth saving. But now I'm starting to ask myself, is it even worth saving anymore? Eleanor frowned. Not because she was surprised, but because that was the exact question that had kept her up last night. Jonathan pulled a slim folder from his coat. A different logo on the cover, not Firecrest. This is a draft plan for a new type of chain. Small, lean, non-corporate. Each branch self-governed under a shared code of ethics, not traditional KPIs. A clean slate, if you want to call it that. Eleanor looked at him, stunned. You're leaving Firecrest? I've already got 1 foot out, Eleanor, he said. I only stayed long enough to see if there was someone left worth passing the original flame to. And then, I met you. So now I offer you 2 paths. Stay in Firecrest. Keep fighting. Keep negotiating. Preserve what's still good. Or walk away with me. Build something new. Clean. But full of risk. No pressure. No persuasion. Just one veteran in the trenches asking a younger fighter. Do you want to keep patching a sinking ship? Or come ashore and build a new one? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She looked down at the city. The rushing cars. The scattered branches. The people who had once been worn down and were now beginning to raise their heads again. She thought of every face. Gavin, Freya, Thomas, Grace, even Agnes. They hadn't walked away. They had chosen to stay. Not because Firecrest deserved them, but because the people inside Firecrest still deserved each other. Eleanor turned to him, her gaze unwavering. I can't leave them behind. Not now. Jonathan nodded, not disappointed. Perhaps he had expected this. Perhaps he had hoped for it. Then I offer you a third option, he said. You stay. I step down. And when they ask who's managing the Southeast, I'll say, no one is managing the region. She's not running a territory. She's leading a culture. Eleanor didn't smile, but something in her lightened. Jonathan gave her a gentle pat on the shoulder, then walked off the rooftop. That night, Eleanor opened her laptop and wrote a new email. Not to retaliate, not to report, just a message to the entire region, a single line. I'm not leaving, because we've started something right, and what's right is worth seeing through. She signed it, for the first time, without a title, Eleanor. 1 month after the rooftop meeting, the Firecrest Southeast region entered an unprecedented turning point. Not because of top-down orders, not due to structural reform, but because a group of people chose to sit down together and name what they were building. In a closed meeting held at an old staff dining room in the Brayford branch, 12 people gathered. Managers, shift leads, kitchen assistants, and even a longtime server named Lena, who hadn't spoken to a supervisor in 2 years. Eleanor didn't lead the meeting. She was just the one who opened the door, poured the water, and stayed silent. On a whiteboard in the room, one sentence slowly emerged. Written, crossed out, rewritten, then kept. Firecrest. A place where honesty isn't punished, and everyone has a part in what's right. Not a slogan, not a marketing line, just a reminder. They gave this culture a name. The open flame. A small symbol was added, a single flame with no border, no background. Someone said, it doesn't need a fence. It needs air. That same week, a branch from the Northwest region, with no ties to Eleanor, sent a message. We heard about open flame. Could we see the materials? We're choking in silence. We need something to begin with. Eleanor didn't reply with a template. She called directly, sent the full documentation, with one simple note. Don't copy. Write your own with the truth where you are. A few weeks later, headquarters had no choice but to acknowledge. The Southeast model hadn't caused collapse. In fact, it retained staff at triple the rate of other regions. Corrigan didn't resist anymore. He chose silence, the politest kind of defeat for a man used to control. Jonathan never reappeared. But one day Eleanor received a parcel. Inside, a worn leather-bound notebook and a small handwritten note. I once wrote about a system worth believing in. Now you're living in it. You don't need me anymore. Jail. Final chapter. The Keeper of the Flame. 1 year passed. Eleanor still sat at a small wooden desk on the 3rd floor of the Regional Coordination Office. But on the office wall, there were no KPI charts anymore. Instead, photographs of people who were once yelled at, invisible kitchen hands, shift leads who had been threatened, and even those who had left but left footprints behind. At the center hung a small plaque. This is not the culture of one person. This is the culture of everyone, when they are no longer afraid. Freya is now the branch manager at Ashwell. Thomas trains new leaders. Grace oversees regional HR, the first time that role was filled by someone from the floor. And Eleanor? She doesn't want another title. She simply says, I'm the flame keeper, but I'm not the only one who lights it. One late evening, after everyone had gone, she stepped outside. Cool wind. The city still loud, but inside calm. No victory music. No triumphant march. Just the quiet presence of something right, allowed to live without justification. Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered to herself, I didn't stay silent. And because of that, everything began to change.